All right, we are looking at page 281 now, and hopefully you already did page 280 for your quiz. Now, page 281, we are starting to talk about another complement. Remember we talked about how there's 4 complements. We've talked about direct objects, indirect objects, and now we're going to talk about the last 2. Now, the first one of that is called a predicate nominative. Now, a predicate nominative renames something, and we've kind of talked about this briefly, so you should kind of know what I'm talking about. But it says the names for the 2 kinds of complements which follow linking verbs, these always come after linking verbs, are predicate nominative and predicate adjective. A predicate nominative is a noun or pronoun that follows a linking verb, not an action verb, a linking verb, and it renames the subject. So predicate nominatives, starts with N, nominatives rename the subject. So we had the example here. Charles Lindbergh was a great flyer. So we know that was is a linking verb because it's going to link flyer to Charles Lindbergh. So we find the subject, which is Charles Lindbergh, was, that's your verb, and we know it's not an action verb, a great flyer. Now, A in great describes flyer. Flyer is your predicate nominative. It renames Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh was what? Was a flyer. It renames him. He's a flyer. So was is a linking verb. Flyer is a noun that renames the subject. So flyer is the predicate nominative. Now you can check this by reversing the predicate nominative and the subject. So if you want to check and see if this is right, if that's a predicate nominative, you can switch it and say Charles Lindbergh was a flyer. Or you can switch it and say a flyer was Charles Lindbergh. So put flyer in place of Charles Lindbergh and say a flyer was Charles Lindbergh. It still makes sense. It's just renaming him. So you know that that is a predicate nominative. And that's a good way to test that. If you had Robert is my cousin. So is a linking verb. It links cousin back to Robert. It's explaining who Robert is. It's your cousin. So switch it around. My cousin is Robert. That still makes sense. So you know that that is a predicate nominative. So a predicate nominative renames your subject. So it's just another name for the subject. Now, if a sentence does not have a linking verb, it will not have a predicate nominative. So if it's an action verb, then it can't have a predicate nominative. Only linking verbs have predicate nominatives. Predicate nominatives come after the linking verb unless the sentence is a question. Now, sometimes you have a question, are you a teacher? And you've probably been taught in order to kind of find the subject and verb, you can switch it around. You are a teacher. And teacher is still your predicate nominative because it's renaming you. You are teacher. A teacher are you. So that is your predicate nominative. So read them all together and test it. And if it makes sense, then you have chosen the correct words. So let's do a couple here. I wrote one or two down. Ralph Waldo Emerson was a pilot. So we're going to find, it says to label the linking verb LV, subject S, predicate nominative PN. So our subject is this whole thing, Ralph Waldo Emerson. That's all one name, so that's all the subject. Was, what was he? A poet. Poet is your predicate nominative. It's renaming him. A poet was Ralph Waldo Emerson, so it's renaming him. Michelle Jones it's a linking verb. Forgot to do that here. Label it as a linking verb. Is our secretary. So secretary, it's renaming who Michelle Jones is. A secretary is Michelle Jones. So it's renaming her. So that is a predicate nominative. So do all of the rest of Think A, and then do Think B as well on that page. It says label each linking verb and action verb. Write PN in the blank if the italicized complement is a predicate nominative, and write DO if it is a direct object. So remember, only action verbs will have direct objects, and only linking verbs will have predicate nominatives. So if it's an action and someone's doing an action, it will not have a predicate nominative. So let's do this, okay? The field is our playground. So find the verb for subject, field is our playground. It is an action verb. It's not an action verb. Nothing's happening. The field isn't doing anything. So it's a linking verb. And playground renames field. So playground is a predicate nominative. A playground is our field. So then you would write PN in the blank over here to say that the italicized word is a predicate nominative. The field is our playground. The playground renames field. Now the one under that, the pilot, your subject, flew. Now is the pilot actually flying his plane? Does a pilot literally fly? Is he doing an action? Yes, he is. He's doing an action, so we know that flew is an action verb. So now that we know that that's an action verb, we automatically know that there's not going to be a predicate nominative. But there might be a direct object. So you ask, pilot flew what? Flew his plane. So plane is the direct object. That's the one that's italicized. It's a direct object. It doesn't rename the pilot. The pilot isn't a plane. It's just describing it. The pilot flew. What did he fly? He flew his plane. So that's a direct object. All right, so that's how to recognize a predicate nominative. So the best way to remember that is predicate nominative renames. So think of it, it's another name. So nominative and name, N and N, so you don't get confused. So predicate nominative renames your subject. All right, on page 282, we're going to also learn about predicate adjectives. So we've learned about predicate nominatives and predicate adjectives. A lot of people get these two confused. So we're going to work on this to try not to get confused. And I will describe it and try to explain this to you. Now, a predicate adjective is an adjective complement that follows a linking verb. So it comes after a linking verb, not an action verb, and it describes the subject. So remember, an adjective describes, a nominative renames. So a nominative renames, an adjective describes. Now, the important thing to remember is a predicate adjective describes the subject. So don't get a predicate adjective confused with normal adjectives. An adjective describes anything, the word that comes after, but a predicate adjective always goes back to the subject. That's what it describes. So our example, the sky is red. Well, red is not a predicate nominative. It's not renaming the sky. It's not the red is sky. Does that make sense? The red is sky. No. Remember, when we tested for predicate nominatives, we said the pilot is Charles Lindbergh. That made sense. But the red is sky does not make sense because that's not a predicate nominative. It's a predicate adjective. It is describing the sky. So is a linking verb. It's not an action verb. And red is an adjective that describes the subject. It describes sky. What color is the sky? It's red. It's a predicate adjective, not a predicate nominative. Now you can check this by putting the adjective right in front of the subject. So instead of saying, you don't do the red is sky, you say the red sky. If that makes sense, then you know it's a predicate adjective. Okay? This milk tastes sour. Taste is a sometimes linking verb. Sometimes it can be an action, sometimes it's a linking, but we know that a milk can't taste something, so the milk isn't doing anything. It's just describing. So the milk tastes sour. Sour is a predicate adjective because it is describing the milk. It's not renaming milk. You can't say the sour tastes milk. No. The sour is milk. No. But you can say this sour milk. So if you put the adjective in front of the subject, the sour milk, if it makes sense, then you know that that was a predicate adjective. Okay? So remember the difference. Don't get predicate adjectives and predicate nominatives confused. And don't confuse normal adjectives with predicate adjectives. So let's look at think A. Label the linking verb, the subject, and the predicate adjective. So our teacher has been sick. So you're labeling the subject, S over teacher, has been, that's your verb, and sick. Now, has been is not an action verb, so we know that that is a linking verb because it's going to link sick to our teacher. Now, is sick another name for teacher? No, it describes the teacher, so that's a predicate adjective. you can say our sick teacher, and that makes sense, our sick teacher. So that is a predicate adjective. The wind, let's go down to, go ahead and you finish think A on your own. It's pretty simple. I only gave you one example. But just remember to use your checking, use your testing. And think B, it says draw 2 lines under each linking verb, 1 line under your subject, write PN or PA. So this is important. Don't get your predicate adjective or your predicate nominatives mixed up. Use your logic and use what I explained. So let's do the first one. The wind was bitterly cold. Underline our subject, wind was bitterly cold. So what is describing the wind? Not bitterly. Bitterly describes cold. The wind was cold. Now, is cold renaming the wind, or is it describing the wind? Is it a predicate nominative or a predicate adjective? Can you say the cold was wind? That doesn't make sense. Can you say the cold wind? That does make sense. This is a predicate adjective. It is not renaming the wind, but it is describing it. And it's cold is describing wind. And was links those two together. So was is a linking verb. Let's go to the next one. Habit is the result of practice. Now, I'll admit, when I first looked at this, I wanted to say the habit is practice. That was my first thought. But realize of practice is, what is that? A prepositional phrase. So that cannot be a predicate adjective or predicate nominative or a direct object. So that can't be anything. It's a prepositional phrase. So habit is result. Now, is result, does that describe the habit? Or is it another name for a habit? Well, let's check it. Can you say the result is a habit? Okay, you can. Can you say the result habit? No, the result doesn't, it's not an adjective, it's not describing habit, it's renaming it. So that is a predicate nominative. Because your result can be a habit. Your habit is a result. You can switch those back and forth. So that is a predicate nominative. All right, so that is on page 282. So do all of think A and think B on page 282. And go on into page 283. A quick thing on page 283, and then I'm going to do another video for page 284. It says in think C, a predicate adjective must modify the subject. Be able to explain why the following italicized adjectives are not predicate adjectives. Draw an arrow to the word that each one modifies. So I just did the first one. It says she is a true friend. Now true is not a predicate adjective. It's an adjective, but true describes friend. You can't say she is true or true is she. No, she is friend. True describes what kind of friend. Predicate adjectives always describe the subject. True is describing friend, so that's just a normal adjective. It's not a predicate adjective. So study the rest on page 283. You do not have to do the right D. Okay, so don't worry about right D. Do the rest on page 283. Just study those so you realize what is a predicate adjective. That always describes the subject. So if it's describing something else, then it's not a predicate adjective. I am a very fortunate girl. Fortunate isn't describing me, it's describing girl. So that is not a predicate adjective, it is just a normal adjective. Okay? If a sentence does not have a linking verb, it will not have a predicate adjective. So if there's no linking verb, you're not going to have a predicate adjective or a predicate nominative. So read that, look closely. You don't have to do the right D, but go ahead and do the remember E. And I'm going to do another video for page 284, which is some diagramming. All right, so stay tuned.